Hello, hello. Welcome to Beautiful Minds podcast. My name is Jamie Taylor, and I am a licensed professional counselor. And today we have the privilege to sit and chat with C.W. Marco. Would you mind introducing yourself for us?
What's going on, everyone? This is author C.W. Marco here. I am a recently self-published author of a science fiction / satire novel, and I am excited to be here and extend on my own story.
Nice. So with that being said, you selected a topic in line with creativity, right? And so the topic you came up with was unboxing the creative mind. Tell me about that.
So creativity for me has always been a very personal, internal process.
Okay.
I never felt the need to share it. So there's no need to share it in my mind. It's mine. And so I'm very selfish when it comes to my creativity. And so I'm slowly learning to expand on it and go from internal to external with my creativity.
Got it. How far back does creativity go for you?
I think I'll go back to my childhood, but not that far back.
Okay.
More like 10, 11, 12. It started with the music. So my family has a very diverse range of music taste.
Okay.
And that diverse range of music taste kind of got like plugged into me. And by the time I was 13 years old, I was listening to not only rap, but rock and electronic and all kind of weird stuff. And so the creativity was in the music for me early on, but it expanded from there, as I got older. So.
Got it. How did it expand to writing? Were books swirling around in there in your childhood?
Books were never swirling around in my childhood at all. There was no libraries in the household.
Got it.
We had the dictionaries, we had encyclopedias. There was no fiction.
Okay.
There was I don't even think there was like a nonfiction kind of books, novels there. And so books was not a part of my life at all. Reading wasn't really part of it.
Assuming it came in somewhere for you to be a published author, Where did it swirl in?
It swirled in from my philosophy class.
Okay.
And it didn't really start there either, because my professor just recommended a book for me, and it was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And so that was my first book I've ever read. I read it on the computer, on a PDF file. Too lazy to go to Barnes & Noble. I'd never been in a bookstore, and so I'll put up a PDF file. So I did that, pulled up a PDF file, and I read it start to finish, all the way through, sitting on the computer, and I was like, wow. Is this what books are about? It's like, that's kind of cool. Okay.
Gotcha. I will say, I did take a look and listen to your YouTube. What was the name of?
It was Author Transparency.
Author Transparency. Absolutely. So what piqued my interest is you talked a little bit about your childhood experiences, feeling like you were mediocre, so on and so forth. Tell me a little bit about that.
So this feeling of mediocrity or not being up to par, that didn't hit until I was well after I was an adult. So at the time I was like, I'm just doing what I do, whatever, cool kid, just hanging out. And at the time I was just being a regular kid. There was no special sauce. There wasn't a driver for me to do something more or motivation. And it wasn't until my senior year when I moved to this area, which is the Houston area. I moved to Conroe, and I took an advanced class. I took an AP psychology class, and I did great in the course. I got a 4 on the AP test.
Psychology?
Yeah, psychology. There's a plug right there for psychology. And I was kind of sitting there. I'm 17, and I'm like, I could have been like a better student like this whole time. I could have been taking advanced classes. In elementary, I had like great attendance. I was like on the honor roll. You know, yeah, I was on
Ah,
the honor roll, like, you know, third grade, you know.
got it.
And then, and then it's just like, and I was just sitting there, I was like, wow, I could have actually like tried in school
Right.
instead of just. And then I wanted to go into psychology.
Okay.
But I wanted to. I was 17 years old, finishing up high school. I was like, let me try psychology out. But then I was like, I got to be in school how long? 8 years? 6 to 8? A decade?
Yes.
And in my mind, I was like, nah, that's not it.
Got it.
And so I settled.
What do you mean you settled?
I settled on a communications major. One, because it was easy, and I knew it was easy.
Okay.
Shout out to communications major. Still a good major, communications, PR, public relations. But I did settle.
Okay.
I was never a STEM student.
Okay.
I like science. I like physics.
Okay.
I like learning about physics.
Interesting.
I never took a physics class in my whole life, not even in college.
Wow.
But I like physics.
Okay.
I like researching physics.
Okay.
And so I think for me, I lacked someone outside of my family or circle or friends to motivate me. I lacked someone to push me. I lacked the challenge. No one challenged me.
So all throughout, you know, your childhood years, all the way throughout high school until 17, you weren't challenged, you didn't feel challenged, you didn't feel motivated. You didn't notice that until adulthood, but at the time it felt just regular schmegular?
Yes, and going into 2021, going into college, graduating college too. I only felt challenged when I was taking these philosophy courses because it made me think.
Got it.
I could count on my hand the times that I actually had to think as a 21-year-old throughout my whole life. And so I was like, wow, I'm actually thinking. You know, wouldn't it have been nice if I was 10 years old and, you know, it's like, man, this is science. And, you know, and, you know, I've never been good at math. Science was cool. And it's just, but the challenge aspect was never.
Got it. So then how did you go from the communications major, settling for that, to being challenged? I'm assuming, you know, is writing and your fiction, your novel, was that a challenge? And if so, what did that look like?
Yes, that was the challenge I needed. And I didn't realize it at the time. The thought just occurred to me, hey, I read my first book and it was like, anything you can do, I can do better. And I was like, well, let me try it out too, you know?
Right.
Because his writing is, Joseph Heller, he's very satirical. He's a post-war author, post-World War II author. He actually fought in the war himself, so he took his war experience into the novel.
Got it.
And made it very satirical. It's so funny. It's like, oh my God, I think I could try this too. I just opened up a blank Word document and went for it.
Got it. So you went for it. How do you go from opening up a Word document to just like landing on writing a whole novel yourself?
Because it went from being a hobby to being a passion.
Got it.
And so I had to bridge that gap between, I'm just doing this for fun, this is my little hobby, it's just me, I don't have to tell anybody. And I was like, hey, well, it looks like I have a couple of strengths in this.
Right.
Why don't I actually try to go out and learn how to do this?
Got it.
The actual way. Let me meet people who are writers. Let me meet other authors. And so it was just, let me go from hobby to practice and just turn it into an actual passion.
Got it. So through practice, you knew in-body. I always talk about in-body indicators in therapy. But in-body, you felt like, okay, this is a passion. This is something that I want to do. I was lacking that in my life. And so I just felt like any other Joe, any other guy, you know, just going back to the mediocrity, unremarkable. And so I felt like there was something missing. Okay.
And that missing factor had to come from me.
Right. Got it. Yeah, so I want to ask you, I think you did the values exercise, right?
Yes.
What were your core values, if you remember?
My core values, top 5, were creativity, wisdom. I think it was something related to wisdom, like either learning or critical thinking, humor.
Okay.
And life.
Got it.
So those were kind of my values.
Awesome. I often talk about, having a comfort zone and a value zone. So it almost sounds like the comfort zone was a place of mediocrity, complacency, maybe. And it requires discomfort to leave that comfort zone to go to your value zone. The comfort zone is meant to just kind of take a breather, right? Your value zone is more fulfilling. So what was it like to kind of finally swim in your value zone? And what were your driving and motivating factors? Since I'm assuming writing a whole novel couldn't have been easy. It had to be uncomfortable. No?
You're right. And it went back to the challenge. And I mentioned in my own video that I treated writing like a musical instrument. And so I needed to fine tune it. I needed to go out. I needed to go somewhere and practice. And I needed to get into this headspace. And so it felt like it is like a journey in of itself. It's like, man, let me take this by the horns and just ride with this.
Got it. Did you have any failures or opportunities for growth? Is what I usually like to say.
Not really. The failures or the opportunities for growth came from just learning my strengths as a writer.
Got it.
And so I would take constructive feedback on, hey, this sentence is awkward, structure, characterization. And so any feedback I got was motivation.
Got it.
And so this was one of the things where failure was a motivation for me. Just to keep going and keep going and keep going and fine tuning and refining.
Okay. Well, one of the things I noticed that stood out to me in your author transparency was you mentioned you needed validation, right? Like that was a driving force. Are you attached to validation? Are you more so motivated just because this is a core value and it's fulfilling? Or are you attached? Do you need that validation to kind of keep going?
I think what it was is I needed a solid response or feedback to working on this for almost a decade now, or basically a decade now. And so I needed validation to my hard work.
Got it.
I didn't have it.
Okay.
So again, all of this was internal. No one knew I was doing this. So I didn't have the, hey, keep going. Good job. All right. I didn't have that,
Right.
And so when it was all said and done, and I felt like this was the best I can do, now I want some validation. Okay. Now I'm ready to hear some validation.
Got it. So not necessarily an attachment to validation, but just a tool to just know where you are.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Another thing that stood out was you talked about going into the creative and writing realm because you didn't want to feel mediocre, right? Yeah. Are you running from an unwanted identity of mediocrity? I guess that's my question.
Yes and yes. So I was running from a mediocre identity, and I still am. And I believe it's also a motivating factor.
Okay.
Because I tried so hard to not be mediocre anymore.
Right.
And so for me to settle now, and for me to take the path of least resistance. So for me to go back to that would be very disappointing and would be just retrograde. It would be regressive for me. And so I feel like I need to get away from it and I need to progress. And so that's yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And what would mediocrity now look like? How would you know that you're falling back into that space?
That's a fantastic question. And going into this next stage for me, I need to figure out what's the next mediocre hurdle that I need to get over. Is it book sales?
Right.
Is it not reaching the audience that I want to reach? And I feel like even that thought is backwards because I wrote the book not thinking of that.
Exactly.
Everything in my head was so pure. There's no distractions, no social media, and everything was so pure. And for me to care, and it's kind of a trade-off, for me to care about these things is, what do I lose? A part of myself, part of my authenticity, but what do I gain in the trade-off? And so there's just a trade-off associated, and I have to pick and choose which one I value the most going forward.
Right. And I'm glad that you said that, because I would challenge you to reframe your lens, right? And rather than running from an unwanted identity, anytime we reference an unwanted identity, we're dealing with shame, right? The idea that something is wrong with me, I'm defective and unworthy. And so that's relative. That goalpost can move. That's why I asked, what does that look like? So there's a difference between running from an unwanted identity versus being in line with your core value. You know, your core values are your ongoing life paths, directives. It's not something that you can necessarily check off of a list, you know, like I can cross it off, but you can make goals within each value. And so I heard you kind of referencing maybe, what are my goals within my value of creativity? Is it sales? Is it having a target audience? That's like a motivator that's in line with your values and more fulfilling, versus running from a goalpost that can move and shame and negativity, so on and so forth. What are your thoughts about that?
No, and you put a positive lens to it, you know, and that's something that I need to hear, because I feel like I'm motivated by negativity, and the negativity comes from myself.
Right.
But in my mind, it's like the negativity makes me stronger or makes me better. And so, you know, it's just, and it's changing the nomenclature, and it's really just changing that philosophy in my head of like, negativity doesn't have to be a positive motivator.
Right.
Positivity can influence positivity.
Right.
So that's a struggle for me. Absolutely.
Got it. Well, I appreciate your vulnerability and your candidness. And for those who are tuning in, where can they find your book? What is the name?
So my book is called Harmony and Chaos. You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I also have a YouTube called Shift in Stories.
Nice.
You can check that out as well. Have an Instagram _entropy, ENTROP.
Got it. So that concludes this episode of Beautiful Minds. Again, thank you for tuning in and joining us.